Somewhere beneath the mountains of western Iran, hundreds of meters below the surface, sits one of the most heavily fortified military installations ever built. Reinforced concrete walls. Blast-proof tunnels. Missile launchers positioned so deep underground that conventional bombs simply bounce off the earth above them. Iran built these facilities for one reason: to survive a U.S. or Israeli strike and still be able to fight back. For decades, military planners in Tehran believed they had solved the problem of American air superiority. If you go deep enough underground, no bomb can reach you. And for a while, that logic held. But here's the part most people miss. The United States wasn't just watching Iran dig deeper. They were building something specifically designed to follow Iran underground. And that changes everything about how this conflict actually works. The central question of this video isn't whether the US can bomb Iran. That's the surface-level question. The deeper question is this: can Iran's underground fortress strategy actually deter American military action? Or has the US already rendered it obsolete? Because the answer to that question doesn't just affect Iran and America. It affects every nation on Earth currently betting on underground facilities to protect its most sensitive military assets. North Korea, Russia, China, every state watching this confrontation is watching for a verdict on whether going underground is still a viable military strategy. This is where the story gets important. To understand why Iran went underground, you have to go back to 1981. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi aircraft, using intelligence and equipment supplied partly by Western powers, repeatedly struck Iranian military infrastructure. Iran's air force was already gutted from post-revolutionary purges. They had almost no air defense capability. They watched their facilities burn and could do almost nothing about it. That lesson was burned into the institutional memory of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRQ. If you leave your military assets on the surface, you lose them. So Iran did something methodical and patient. Over the next 4 decades, they went underground. According to assessments from the Institute for Science and International Security and reports from the IAEA, Iran developed an extensive network of hardened underground facilities, including Fordow, buried inside a mountain near Qom, specifically chosen because its depth made it resistant to existing bunker-busting weapons at the time of construction. The IRGC's aerospace force built what they called missile cities, massive underground complexes housing ballistic missile launchers, fuel storage, command and control infrastructure, and launch systems capable of firing without ever surfacing into the open air. By the early 2020s, Iranian commanders were publicly displaying footage of these facilities with visible pride. General Amir Ali Hajizadeh of the IRG Aerospace Force called them the underground power of Iran. The message was deliberate: you cannot destroy what you cannot reach. On the surface, the logic looked airtight. Iran's underground doctrine wasn't just about survival. It was about deterrence by denial. The strategic logic worked like this: if Iran can absorb a first strike and still launch hundreds of ballistic missiles at U.S. bases across the Middle East, at Israel, at regional partners, then the cost of attacking Iran becomes too high for any adversary to accept. Iran didn't need to win a war. They needed to make a war unwinnable for the other side. This is the same logic that drives nuclear deterrence globally. Mutual assured destruction. Except Iran applied it conventionally, using precision ballistic missiles and hardened underground infrastructure as the delivery mechanism. And for a period, it worked as a political deterrent. American administrations from Bush through Obama, through Trump, through Biden, all calculated that the cost of a full military confrontation with Iran was prohibitive. Not because of Iran's conventional military capability, which is significantly outmatched by U.S. power, but because of what Iran could do after the first strike from a position underground. But here's where Iran's calculation ran into a problem they didn't fully anticipate. The United States military did not sit still while Iran dug. After observing hardened underground facilities in Iraq, North Korea, and Iran throughout the 1990s and 2000s, the Pentagon launched a sustained program to develop weapons capable of defeating deep underground targets. The result was the Jibu-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the MOP. At 30,000 pounds, this is the largest conventional bomb ever deployed by the United States Air Force. It carries roughly 5,300 pounds of high explosives. But the key isn't the size. The key is the penetration capability. The MOP is designed to drill through approximately 200 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Carried exclusively by the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the aircraft specifically designed to survive sophisticated air defense environments, the MOP represents the U.S. answer to the underground fortress problem. But the U.S. didn't stop there. Reports from the Pentagon and assessments by analysts at the RAND Corporation suggest the MOP has undergone multiple upgrade cycles specifically targeting deeper facilities. The weapon that exists today is meaningfully different from the one tested a decade ago. And then there's the targeting question, which is where the intelligence architecture becomes as important as the physical weapon. You cannot strike what you cannot locate. The U.S. investment in signals intelligence, satellite reconnaissance, and critically, human intelligence networks inside Iran's military establishment has been ongoing for decades. On the surface, this looks like a weapons program. But the real strategy was happening in the intelligence domain. Knowing where Iran's facilities are located, how deep they are, what they contain, and how they are defended, that intelligence work is inseparable from the military capability. This conflict does not exist in a vacuum. And no actor has applied more consistent pressure on this strategic equation than Israel. Israel's security doctrine, what analysts call the Begin Doctrine, established after the 1981 strike on Iraq's Osirak reactor, holds that Israel will not allow any regional adversary to acquire the capability to existentially threaten the Jewish state. Full stop. Non-negotiable. Israel has conducted strikes on nuclear-adjacent facilities in Iraq in 1981, in Syria in 2007, and has engaged in a sustained covert campaign against Iran's nuclear and missile programs, including the assassination of nuclear scientists, the Stuxnet cyber attack on Natanz centrifuges conducted in coordination with the United States, and multiple strikes inside Iranian territory in 2024 that demonstrated Israel's ability to penetrate Iranian air defenses in ways that shocked military analysts globally. Israel's 2024 strikes were significant, not just for what they hit, but for what they demonstrated. That Iranian air defense systems, Russian-supplied S-300 batteries, could be defeated, and that Israeli aircraft could operate over Iranian territory with more freedom than Iranian commanders had publicly acknowledged. Israel's strategic goal in continuously escalating pressure is to force a decision point. Either Iran abandons its most dangerous programs under sustained pressure, or Israel forces the United States to recognize that the window for decisive action is closing. This is where the conflict becomes dangerous. Russia and China are observing this confrontation with extraordinary attention, but not for the reasons most people assume. Both nations operate extensive underground military infrastructure. China's People's Liberation Army Rocket Force, responsible for China's ballistic missile arsenal, uses a tunnel network reportedly spanning thousands of kilometers, sometimes called the Underground Great Wall by Chinese state media. Russia maintains deep underground command facilities dating to the Soviet era, some of which have been modernized specifically to survive a first nuclear strike. If the U.S. demonstrates conclusively in a real conflict that its bunker-busting capability can defeat Iranian underground facilities at depth. That demonstration sends a direct message to Beijing and Moscow about the viability of their own underground deterrence infrastructure. This is why both Russia and China have strategic reasons to want Iran's underground facilities to survive a confrontation. Not because of ideological solidarity, but because Iran's underground fortress is, in a sense, a proxy test of their own deterrence doctrine. Here's what the mainstream coverage almost always misses. The confrontation over Iran's underground facilities is not primarily about Iran's nuclear program in isolation. It's about whether the post-Cold War security architecture, in which American conventional military dominance was assumed to be unchallengeable, still holds in the 2020s. Iran's underground strategy represented a rational attempt by a mid-tier regional power to create a deterrent against that dominance using concrete and depth rather than nuclear warheads. If that deterrent fails, if the United States can credibly demonstrate it can reach and destroy targets at depth in hardened facilities inside a defended airspace, then every nation currently sheltering behind underground infrastructure has to recalculate their security equation. That recalculation almost certainly accelerates nuclear weapons programs, because if conventional deterrence underground is no longer viable, the only remaining option for states that feel existentially threatened is a weapon that creates undeniable mutual destruction risk. The failure of Iran's bunker strategy may, paradoxically, make the world more nuclear, not less. Three futures are now competing in real time. Scenario 1. Negotiated constraints. Iran, recognizing the limits of its underground deterrent, returns to serious diplomatic engagement and accepts verifiable constraints on its most sensitive programs in exchange for sanctions relief. This is the scenario American and European diplomats have pursued with varying intensity since 2003. Scenario 2. Iranian nuclear breakout. Iran concludes that conventional deterrence is no longer sufficient, accelerates enrichment to weapons-grade levels, and tests a nuclear device, calculating that nuclear status provides the deterrence umbrella that underground bunkers could not. This is the scenario Israel treats as an existential red line. Scenario 3. Military confrontation. A combination of Israeli operational pressure, Iranian miscalculation, or a domestic political shift in Washington produces a military strike on Iranian facilities. The outcome of that strike, and specifically whether it successfully destroys Iran's deepest underground assets, becomes the defining data point for the global security architecture for the next generation. Each scenario carries consequences far beyond the Persian Gulf. Here is what this conflict is really about. Iran spent 40 years and enormous national resources building an underground military infrastructure specifically designed to survive the most powerful, conventional military force in human history. It was a rational strategy. It was methodical. And for decades it succeeded as a deterrent, not because it was invincible, but because the cost of testing it appeared too high. The United States spent those same decades building the specific tools, the weapons, the intelligence networks, the delivery platforms to defeat exactly that strategy. What we are witnessing is not simply a conflict between two countries over nuclear weapons or regional influence. We are watching a live, high-stakes test of whether American conventional military dominance, the defining feature of the post-Cold War international order, can be sustained against nations that have spent decades specifically engineering defenses against it. The answer to that question will be studied in military academies in Beijing, Moscow, Pyongyang, and capitals across the world for decades. This conflict isn't just about Iran and America. It is about what kind of world emerges from the answer, and that answer is still being written.